Welcome to the Pink Pill RX podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or Pink Pill RX.
That's KATORS88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review. Today's episode is a first. We are welcoming our first ever male guest, Owen Marcus, and I am so glad that it's him. Owen's a pioneering voice in men's emotional development. His work blends somatic therapy, group connection, and a radical reimagining of what masculinity could be if we let go of the lies we were taught. Owen has spent 30 years helping men unlearn emotional suppression and reconnect with themselves and with others through somatic and nervous system work. His belief? Men's emotional disconnection isn't just a men's issue. It's something women deal with every day in relationships, families, and workplaces. Owen is the author of Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, and the founder of MELD, Men's Emotional Leadership Development. He's helped thousands of men and their partners heal from the emotional numbness patriarchy can often breed.
Welcome, Owen. I wanted to be incredibly mindful of who we brought on as our first male guest. Don't even know if you realize you're our first male guest or not. I'm so happy that it is you because I really feel like your work and your voice is deeply aligned with our mission and what we do here. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time out to be here with us today.
Well, thank you. I forgot. You did tell me I'd be the first. I forgot that I was. So I feel really honored and a little nervous. I gotta perform like.
You're going to do great. It's going to be awesome. So excited to talk to you.
Yes, I am so excited.
We've been listening to podcasts that you've been on in the past, and we've, been reading about you and just so intrigued by what you do. And it's so needed in the world that we live in today. So
yeah. And if I could just speak one thing just from personal experience, and I'll talk about this probably later in the episode. I've been in somatic therapy for a year, and with family systems as well, and so really love the perspective that you're coming from with all of this.
So to start off, can you give us just a little bit of background on how you came to do the work that you do?
I got into it 30 years ago because I didn't want to get into it. Short story is 50 years ago, I just got into all the somatic work. I was living in Boulder, Colorado. I had a roommate that was an attorney that gave up his law practice to learn this. He convinced me to try it, and I was hooked. And so I healed a lot. I realized later that, I grew up with Asperger's, dyslexia, and then later with Lyme disease, and took all those on and really, either healed them or significantly improved them. But I realized that my relationships weren't at the level I wanted them to be at. And then I had one woman that I was in a relationship with, and she one night was being very passionate and compassionate and kept on saying, "Owen, I don't feel you." I wasn't arguing with her, but I was like debating with her, giving her all these reasons why she should feel me. Then after a few minutes of her being patient and me being dumb, I realized, no wonder she doesn't feel me. I'm just giving her reasons and I'm not connecting with her emotionally. And that was enough to go, oh, I need to do something about this. And then I go, oh, I should look at men's groups and say, oh, I don't want to do that. And then I go, well, maybe if I don't want to do it, I should do it. So I did my due diligence. Did a training, got into it, started my first men's group when I had my clinic in Scottsdale. And that was really the beginning. Then ended up moving to North Idaho. 10 years later, saw the limitation of the old model and said, look, I'm going to develop a new model based on everything I was using clinically that was really working for me and thousands of clients and see what happens. I invited 11 guys, and those 11 guys ended up being the 7-Point Men's Group, which to this day is going strong. We've had over 500 guys in this group, over 60 guys in the current group, or groups of 5 groups. And one of those groups is a group of expats, and I'm in that group.
Wow. It seems like the best work ends up being the work we don't want to do. Like, I feel that way. I feel like we kind of accidentally fell into what we do even. It was just a kind of an accidental thing. And then now this is what we're doing. So that's really cool. I'm going to just jump right into the nitty gritty and just start asking you some hard questions here, if that's okay.
I love hard questions.
Great. So something that I have found fascinating along our journey with the pink pill and just feminist content is how surprised women are by Jay's openness and how uncomfortable many men get with it. And they often will comment and call him a beta in like the comments, or that he's just trying to get laid, or joke around that he's being held hostage and he's doing this against his will, in basically any and all excuses under the sun to make it to where, what his reactions are or his content contribution is, like, try to invalidate it. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is really going on there?
First, I think those comments of those men are really the minority, number one. We don't get those guys. And in general, I think the whole zeitgeist is really changing. 30 years ago, the average guy was resistant to this work. And now I think the average guy is open, and many of them are like seeking it out, where before they would have avoided it for a few reasons. A lot of it was because of the culture. So I think the culture's changed. And specifically, I think there are men that are scared, and we can get into why they're scared. But I think those guys are the minority, and we rarely ever get any of those comments.
Well, that's encouraging.
To your credit, I do wonder how many men watch the videos and don't comment.
True.
And then you have men who comment positive things, and you have some men that comment things like that. And I just wonder, I wonder if the majority of men would just be listening, but not maybe commenting
engaging.
Anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's very possible.
Well, you know that more people are likely to give a negative comment to anything than a positive comment.
That's a good point, too.
That is a good point, yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into why men are scared. You had mentioned getting into that. So let's talk about, why do you think... Actually, I'm going to let you take over.
Well, I was going to actually ask the same question. So,
Okay.
I mean, men possibly being scared. I don't know if it's to engage with the content that we're presenting, or engage with, the women's perspective of their lived experience, or what take you might have on the fear that could be presenting itself there.
Well, I think there's a lot of factors. I think the first is that we all are traumatized, sometimes obvious, blunt force trauma, or, sexual trauma, the things that we think of. Some would say the big T trauma. But most of us are traumatized in what I call microtraumas, or just chronic stress. And so it doesn't take much if you're traumatized to get sort of activated. So that's part of it. Another part is that, the culture has really trained us, and particularly as men, that being emotional is a particular way of being emotional. It doesn't really fit for men. And then I sort of get into this in that TEDx talk I did, I don't know, 10 years ago, where, what I saw, when we were all in tribes 10,000 years ago, our genome was 99.9 of what we have today. So we really haven't changed, but the culture's changed in 10,000 years. And particularly what's happened in the last few hundred years is, when the factories came online, we sort of, as a man, we went offline, we left home. And so women had to step up and raise the kids and raise the boys. And over the years, that became the predominant model of emotionality for men. And it's not a conspiracy, which is a natural thing. And it wasn't that women did anything wrong, or men were, dropping the ball. We were at work. And so the subsequent generations, we sort of left that motto. What is it to be emotional, to be vulnerable, to be connected, to be all the things that we really want to be, and deeper in our instincts or genome we have? What is that? How do we do that today? And we don't know, because we haven't seen it. And so what we see with these guys is they come to us at least confused, if not in some ways traumatized. And, the guys we get are trying to work this out, more than just cognitively, but really in terms of their skill set. And what we find is when we put men with other men in the full spectrum, age, education, race, professional experience, all that, pretty quickly, they all self-regulate, they down-regulate, and they start to connect. Because what they realize is that we're all way more similar than we're dissimilar. And what happens is one guy takes my cue and says, all right, I'm going to stretch myself here and be vulnerable and take the risk that would be very risky out there in the normal societal situation and share something that would be vulnerable. And what he immediately finds is rather than to be shamed as he would be out there, he's actually honored in this container. And then what happens is, because we've done trainings with over 60 guys in one room, we'll have a big circle of guys, and I'll say, look, we're changing the rules of engagement. In this scenario, you get honored for taking emotional risks. And then after a guy or two, someone will step up and do it. And when he sees he's not shamed, but honored, everyone else sees that. And then guys get a little competitive because we know we're competitive.
Oh.
And then we go around the whole circle and guys just start to become more vulnerable, more honored. And other guys start crying because they have a similar issue. And within a course of a half an hour, we've gone from a room that's sitting like, I don't know why I'm here. I think you're all idiots and to like, I just found my best friend. And all that really was creating an emotionally safe container. And that is the foundation of all healing. Any kind of healing has to happen in a state of safety. Otherwise, we're in a threat response, which is a stress response, which changes our whole nervous system orientation. And we're very limited in our ability to connect and to heal.
I need a second with that because I can imagine. You're telling that story. I'm imagining being a part of that group and just what that would feel like. Because often my lived experience is sharing more emotional parts of myself and being vulnerable like that. It's often met with sometimes hostility, sometimes met with like, oh, I don't really know what to do with that, Jay. Just thanks for telling me. Like not a lot of like outward support, and so it does. I do walk around feeling threatened a lot. I've never even articulated that with you.
No,
it does feel kind of threatening to walk around with these emotional things going on that I really don't feel like I can share with other people.
And Jay, you're right on, and it is threatening. And most guys, I didn't really know it, and we don't really know it until we have this other experience. And guys, that's one of the things that start to happen is they start to realize I was in this constant level of threat, and I didn't know it because no one else talked about it. And part of being in a level of threat is not being connected. It's a level of disassociation. And so we're trained not to feel and not to really express. And so we start to orient around what's the threat response and how do we work our way around it rather than what am I feeling and how do I express it?
You talk about building, that safety container, right, around men to be able to share that stuff. And that's what you do in your groups. I feel like often women can accidentally, unintentionally not be a safe place. Sometimes they can intentionally be not a safe place. But how do you think that women can build a safer emotional container for men to be able to approach these emotional topics with, the special women in their life?
Excellent question, Katie. Esther Perel's a good friend of ours and a huge supporter of what we do. And she's a champion of that. And she's always telling women, basically, and these are my words, sort of chill out, because, and this is, and I have to tell women this, and they get it, is that, look, us guys are behind the emotional and relationship curve. I go, yeah, okay, yeah, I think you guys are, right? We are. So we're trying to learn, but because we're behind the curve, we're a little behind it. So we're not going to be as articulate or exact or as connected or proficient as you might want. That's one thing. So give us a little space. So let the guys screw up, because that's one of the things in our groups and trainings is one of the first rules is make mistakes, take risks and make mistakes. You will not be shamed for any mistake. You will actually be honored. And that's what happens. Guys quickly, and that happens naturally. We don't often even have to say it. So women, and this is what I tell the guys, is that your partner is sensitive. So you feel that you're changing. You see you're changing. You interact with me differently. We go through all the things that are changing, and you lean in, and she's pushing back. And then in her defense, I say, well, you've been checked out for whatever reason for all these years. Now you're starting to be checked in. and she's not really trusting it. So give her a little time. And so she's testing you consciously or unconsciously because she needs to know that you're going to show up in a way that no matter what she does or how she leans in, you're not going to check out or leave or get upset. And there's usually a bit of a lag effect. That's one variable. And another one is what I was inferring before is that she sort of has to learn that as a man, we're going to feel and express differently than a woman. So a little aside to that is, when I was living in this small town in North Idaho, women would come up to me, women I didn't know on the street, which was common in a town of 9,000, and go, Owen, I just want to thank you. And I don't know who she is. My husband, my boyfriend is completely different. And she goes on about all the ways he's completely different. And what it was that, he not only got the model and he learned it, but he had a place to practice it. So it just naturally generalized at home. And what he was learning was how to be emotional as a man. And once a woman really gets that, it's like these women would tell me, that's the guy I fell in love with. That's the guy I married. And he's not being emotional in the way that I would teach him. Because that's one of the things that's happened with women is they've gotten the unfortunate job of being the emotional and relational responsible party in a relationship. So they feel like they got to teach us how to be emotional. And for us, it's like, the woman says, look, I made you this beautiful dress out of this beautiful material. I want you to wear it. And we put it on and go, yeah, it's beautiful. It might sort of fit, but I'm a guy. I don't wear dresses. And so there's sort of this adjustment where once she really feels the essence of his confidence and his emotional maturity, whatever you want to call it, she starts to relax. And then actually she goes, how he's being emotional is better than I would have wanted. And she starts to realize, if not consciously, sort of unconsciously, he's being emotional as a man. And that's the kind of man I've always wanted, but never saw. I didn't see it in my father. I didn't see it in the other men I dated. So she's also been lacking that model. And once that man starts to find his natural adaptation in that model, the relationship starts to reset. And we see that we do retreats all over the world for couples. And within a couple of days, these women are saying, I don't know what you're doing to our guys, but I want some of that. Because you completely changed him. And with that, you completely changed the relationship.
That really reminds me of what you were saying earlier about Industrial Revolution and men leaving the home, and then the women are the teachers, and the women are the ones present in the home, and they're trying to teach it how to be emotional. And then it kind of repeats itself in a relationship dynamic, because then, like you were referring to, like women often becomes like the emotional coach or the emotional caretaker of the relationship. And then I'm not going to reiterate everything you said, but that just makes a lot of sense to me. And I think you could probably remember some of that earlier in our marriage and our relationship, when like I just struggled so hard to talk about anything.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I've done a lot of like work myself, but I feel like years and years ago, if you were to come out like more emotionally to me and stuff, because I didn't have that modeled in a father figure, or because I didn't have that modeled in my life, I think that there's probably some element there that when that does start to come to the surface, that I think there's some fear too of like, what does this mean about being a man? Like, this isn't the man that I'm used to. And like, I need my man to protect me, or I need my man to, I think I would have thought that maybe more so than I do now. But I bet you a lot of women want their men to be more emotional. But when it becomes a reality, they feel like maybe that's less masculine, or that there's something there that's threatening to them. And I wonder if it's because they're lacking a model, or if you've seen that or have any opinions on that.
I have. And I spent 4 years in Boulder many years ago, as I said, and I left for several reasons. One, because it was too sort of new age, or maybe now you'd say woke. And what I was seeing, and I sort of realized more after the fact, was that women really were wanting and pushing a guy to be sensitive. And I remember, back then reading this book by a woman therapist. It was a small book. It was on how to be a sensitive man. And it was like my Bible. I got it down. And women loved it. I learned how to be sensitive and they loved it. But then I started to realize that they might have loved it initially, but it wasn't really fostering a solid relationship. And then I started asking, why are these bright women, why are they attracted to the bad boys? And, that would mistreat them. And then I started to realize, okay, there was a couple of dots I needed to connect. And even though that guy might have been inappropriate or whatever, but it was like he was being a guy, he was being assertive. And so I think there's a meld between being sensitive and being overly assertive in a hyper masculine macho way. And that's what we both want, but we don't know what that third point is because we've never seen it. And what I realized in developing this work over the years is the way to get there, and the foundation of that is a function of two things. One of the somatics, which we can talk about, and the other is the communal, putting guys with other guys. And when those two are combined, pretty quickly guys start to find their own unique way of being masculine or being emotional, being open and vulnerable, which is sort of sensitive, but being this term that I call assertive vulnerability. Not that it wouldn't apply to a woman, but I think particularly for a man, it's being able to be open, which is to be vulnerable, but assertive, being able to stand in your vulnerability. So we think, I certainly thought being vulnerable was like, being in my chair, sitting here, crying, sobbing. Nothing wrong with that. We had a guy last night doing that in our group. And that can be powerful. But also for a guy is the ability to stay open, maybe crying, and literally and metaphorically take a stance. And we can get into how we're hardwired to be the provider and protector and take action. So when a guy can be open and take action at the same time, people are going to respond to him differently. Yeah, some people might feel a little threatened, but I think most people are going to feel like, oh, there's a man in this room. I can relax.
We don't talk very often about that being a woman's experience. So there's a man in this room I can relax. It's often quite different.
It's often the opposite of that women often feel. But I think the kind of man that you're describing, I think a woman would feel like, oh, there's a man in the room, I can relax.
Right. Yeah. I would love to get into, like you had mentioned, some of the somatics of it. Guys can be so disconnected from feeling what our emotions are, and we can talk about them cerebrally, but then we don't actually feel them. And so there's the disconnect when you're talking with a partner, because I can talk about my feelings, but you don't feel me and feel what I'm talking about.
I really saw it when we started. My partner's a couples therapist, and like I said, we do these workshops and retreats, and so we do a little teaching, and then most of the retreat or whatever is these couples working as couples, and we go around and sort of assist and ask questions. But usually what I'm doing is, if you're the couple, I sit down and in this archetype, you're really trying to connect to Katie. You're using all your emotional skills, and she's going. She's getting pissed, or she's checking out. She's not connecting, and you pick it up, if not consciously, certainly unconsciously, which raises your threat level, which makes you even more ineffective, and it's a vicious cycle. And I just stop and I point that out, and everyone goes, yeah, and I go to Jay and I say, can I help you? Oh yeah, help me. So can I just channel what you're saying in a way that she can hear it? Yeah. So I take a second, sort of drop into my somatic experience, and get a sense of what I believe you're really feeling. And then I spend like 2 minutes talking to Katie in this other tone of voice about how I really feel and how I feel hurt that I can't connect to you. And, my chest hurts, and I start to feel nervous, and I start to feel anxious, like I'm not doing a good job. I see your face. And then, I start thinking about what do I need to do? And so I start to just channel my emotional vulnerability, maybe with some assertiveness in there. And you, Katie, you start to downregulate. You're going, yeah, yeah, yeah. You see it. You start to see how we're connecting. And it's like, that's what I'm feeling. And then I go, all right, now I want you to do it. And you go, oh. I go, no, I'm going to help you. And you start doing it. And the secret, and this is a somatic part for most of our guys, this is what I found when I was having my clinic, is that when I would ask a guy an emotional question, and I was one of them, I'd look for the closest door out of the room. But when I would ask that same question in terms of stress or the somatics or the physiology of it, you'd answer it. And you'd answer more and more questions. And either you eventually start telling me about your emotions, or if I asked an emotional question, you'd tell me. Because we have no threat or shame or hesitation about talking about our somatic experience, with a few exceptions. And even then, I can get a guy in a minute or so talking about it. But we all, as guys, particularly in mixed company, mixed with a female or in an outside situation, have a lot of concern about talking about our emotions. But we can almost always talk about our physical somatic experience. So, I ask you a question and I can see in your face that you're sad. And so I probably, if it's the first time that we work, I'm not going to go, what are you feeling? No, I'm going to go, okay, Jay, what do you notice in your body? And okay, and then what do you notice now? And after a few minutes of you feeling your body, you're going to be down regulating and co-regulating with me and self-regulating with yourself. And the secret, at least one of them, is that when we're feeling our somatic experience, we're telling our bodies that we're safe. Because when we're in a threat response, we're oriented out there. And so when we bring our orientation inside, somatically and through the vagal, polyvagal theory, and we can get out to all the science, we are telling our gut and everything else, oh, if I can feel you, I must be safe.
Wow. Because historically, if you're paying attention to yourself, it means, oh, there's no lion, there's no bear, there's no predator that you need to be worried about. So you're safe enough to focus on yourself, and our body still remembers that that's what that means. That if I'm paying attention to myself, there's no external threat, so I can relax and start to calm down.
You got it.
Wow. Because I notice when I'm in a counseling session and we're doing something somatic, and I just pay attention to, how my hands feel, or my feet, or my shoulders, or things like that. Oh, or my breath is kind of fast, what's going on, and I'm paying attention to that. I'm not having any type of groundbreaking revelation or anything cognitively stimulating. It's just I'm paying attention to my body, but then I feel a lot more regulated and at ease after. I never knew that was the kind of mechanism that works there.
Yeah, and as you said, we're hardwired for it, men and women. And when we can turn on that circuit, it starts working. And through neuroplasticity, we know the more we turn it on, the stronger that or those circuits get.
So in a relationship or in a disagreement or a conversation, so is the reason why a lot of men can at least visually seem like they're shutting down be because their threat level is so high, and they're so high in their threat response that's their, I don't know, their survival mechanism?
Yeah, so we all know about fight and flight. And then in 1980, I was trained as a Rolfer, among other things, and I was in this Rolfing conference, and Peter Levine, who literally wrote all the books on all this, was teaching us about this. And he was originally a Rolfer, and Dr. Rolf said, hey, Peter, you're just too small to be a Rolfer. Went and got a couple of PhDs from Berkeley and developed, his work, and he discovered with others, but he really brought it out, particularly in terms of how to work with it, was that when we can't run and we can't fight, we are hardwired to freeze. And so what happens is, my little story is I used to live in North Idaho in the forest. I had a meadow out in front of my house. There'd be a lot of deer out there. And if one of the local cougars came down, took down the deer, and the cougar wasn't hungry and left, and the deer, was not dead, but just in shock, after a few minutes of coming out of shock, it would stand up and tremble. And you can see videos of mammals doing this on YouTube. And then after a couple of minutes of it, it just walks away. And that tremble, he's released the charge and reset his nervous system, and he has no PTSD. Our problem, be it major trauma or a lot of little micro traumas, is we never got to reset. So it just accumulates, and we acclimate to that accumulation. And then what happens is it doesn't take much of a threat to put us in that freeze response, which is the disassociation. Just like the deer, we check out when we can't run and we can't fight because we don't want to feel the pain. And if we get eaten, and/or we want to look like we're dead because maybe this predator, in this little example, go, all right, he's dead. I'll come back later and have my meal.
Okay. Because I've done that before where like I've been in a conversation with you even, and I just shut down. I don't have any words. I'm kind of frozen. My brain isn't even firing. I can't even think of what to say type situation. And so are there other ways that this freezing shows up other than just like that type of presentation in a relationship? Or do you see more fight in flight responses? Or is it like, I'm not going to flee. I want to stay in this relationship or stay in this conversation. I don't want to fight you. But I don't have any other alternative. So, I mean, does it show up in other ways? Do you see fight responses or flight responses or different types of freezing that often happen with men in relationships and this type of scenario?
Yeah, that's another good question. Yeah, and so we say that the only emotion men can do or are good at is anger. And women are good at it too. It's just a little different. But that kind of anger is not real anger. It's reactionary anger. And I would say reactionary anger has some freeze to it. In other words, that person might be displaying or expressing anger, but there's a level of disconnect, or maybe a big level of disconnection that's happening. So they're reacting. And there's a lot of cues that it's a reaction, but part of what's happened is something got triggered in that person. So in some way, their physiology, maybe their psyche is back in their trauma or that lineage of that stressful situations that they've had. And they're sort of, unbeknownst to them, living it all out in this present moment, so one little stimuli becomes a big stimulus for them to have this disproportional reaction. And the other person going, I just, drop this pen, but you're reacting as if I hit you. And I just don't get this. And that dissonance between that stimuli and the overreaction is that person's trauma or chronic stress being stimulated. And there's a disconnect where that person doesn't really, certainly on a cognitive level, probably an emotional, somatic level, really not just understand it, but have that connection. And so essentially what has to happen for both the people in the relationship is there needs to be a bit of a down regulation, not just to understand it. And that's where a lot of therapy goes, is to the understanding, which is not bad, but it's often very limiting because couples or individuals can really understand their emotional dance or their collective dance, but understanding it in most cases, particularly if there's a history of stress or trauma there, is not going to be enough to change it because they can understand it, but in the heat of battle, in a threat response, that physiology takes over. So we have to really retrain that nervous system and the body to not behave that way. Understanding helps, and understanding sort of sets a new frame, but we need to get in there and help that person and that couple, which is what we do in like our retreats, to we rewire that collective nervous system because the relationship has its own like nervous system to it.
Ooh, can we talk a little bit more about that?
I knew you were going to like that.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. And I think that that's obviously, true in something that I've seen in our own relationship. It's its own kind of entity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to take us back in the conversation, but I am curious to know, in these groups that you do, when you start talking like this and you start talking about, okay, but how are you physically feeling, somatically, is it hard for men to identify what they're physically feeling, or does that come easier for them?
In most cases, it comes pretty easy.
Okay.
And they're usually surprised how easy it is. And the variable is they got to feel safe.
Right.
It's not impossible to do when you feel a threat response. And this is what we work with. So what happens is I say we learn it on the long tail where the threat's down. And then what happens is you get it down, your nervous system gets it down. So when you're in a fight where, it's elevated and, the high point of that bell curve, you're a lot more likely to know what's happening and be able to change it. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you can do it on the long tail where, there's not a lot of excitement or stress or threat, and which is what we do in our trainings and groups. And guys pick it up pretty quickly. And the beauty of the way that we do it is they get to practice it. They get to see it with others in all these settings.
Yeah.
So it's not like, all right, I did it one-to-one, or I understand it, I read the book or listened to the video. No, they get to work it out and practice it with these guys. And pretty quickly they see how effective they can be.
I did cognitive behavioral therapy for a while, and it was good. I got some strategies and maybe some new understandings and stuff like that, and it was good, but it was not the transformative thing that somatic therapy has been. And is that part of what you were saying earlier about how maybe I can understand what's happening, but it doesn't allow me to necessarily change what happens or my body have a different reaction when a stressor comes up?
Yeah, cognitive therapy and analytical therapy, which is particularly big in New York City, it's sort of seen its heyday because the two hottest therapies are the somatic work, particularly SC or somatic experience, Peter Levine developed, and Sue Johnson's work, emotional focused therapy or EFT, and that's what my partner does. And and Sue's she passed away over a year ago. It was a huge endorsement of her work and said that, Owen, if you were doing therapy, you'd be doing EFT work. Yeah, close. I mean, they focus a little more on relationships, but I always thought it was interesting that they had to put emotional in their name of the therapy because emotions have been for the last so many years left out of therapy, but now it's coming back. The emotions are coming back and the physiology is coming back, and they're really two sides of the same coin. And yeah, we need to do that. And it's always a little scary in the beginning and not really understanding, but again, guys in a safe space pick it up really quick.
What's interesting to me is that if you come to me and you're trying to explain something cerebrally to me,
Yeah.
right? And I can tell that connection, I'm not really connecting with that. Mm-hmm. How much more empathy and compassion I would have if you started describing your somatic experience of this is how my body, this is how it makes my body feel. For me personally, I just would be that puts me in a different mental space because now I'm picturing what that physically feels like and what that would mean for me. And I think that's just such a unique tool that women could use or keep in mind in their relationships because it would make a difference. Even when you're expressing how you feel about me, just romantically, for example. Mm-hmm. I think that even the somatic descriptions would be so much more impactful in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's also neutral.
Oh.
So, again, as you were saying, Jay, often we think, and I use that word intentionally, that we're being emotional and we're really being more intellectual. But even if we're being emotional, it can have more of a charge or a trigger for someone where we're, saying a somatic thing, it's sort of neutral and it's sort of like foreplay for the emotional stuff. So you get a rapport going around the more neutral conversation around a somatic experience. And okay, I'm not in a threat response. We're talking here. He or she's having this in their body. Now we can roll into the emotional stuff. And if I don't get it perfect, there's some allowance for imperfection here.
Yeah, that foundation has been laid, and it's a safe, neutral foundation.
Right, and I love what you said earlier. You talked about in these groups. You're there to try stuff and make mistakes and whatnot, which I relate to as an entrepreneur because a lot of that has been trying stuff, making mistakes, moving on, trying stuff, making mistakes, moving on. And it's interesting because if I am trying to open up emotionally for one of the first times with a friend or with you or something like that, and then it's met with some type of discouraging response, I tried and made a mistake, then I'm ooh, I don't know if I want to try that again. Or I don't know if I want to try that again very soon because I tried and made me feel worse. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. in podcasts that we've listened to and stuff like that, you've described masculinity not as something to reject, but something to rewrite. So what does healthy, emotional, intelligent masculinity actually look like?
Yeah, beyond what we were saying, it includes some of that assertive vulnerability. So for a guy to be able to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable to someone else, he first has to be vulnerable to his own experience. So I can't be more vulnerable to you, or really more connected to you, or you probably connected to me, any more than I am connected to myself. So one of the things that we first work on is getting these guys connected to their own experience. And as I said, getting connected to their own somatic experience first. So that's a lot of it. And you might have heard me say that all the thousands of guys have come to us over the years. No one has ever come and said, I want to work on my masculinity. The only place you hear those words are academia and the media. So us guys, we don't think that way, and we don't behave that way. And we can translate into, that concept. And I can talk about it, but it's a concept. And guys, love it or hate it, we're practical. It's like, give me the tools and show me how to use the tools, because I want to build something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Huh. And I guess we think about the term or the concept because it is kind of in media all the time, whether it's talked about in news media, whether it's in like fiction media.
Yeah, it's talked a lot more about than like femininity. I think about it, I'm like, I'm not going to go into a place being like, I want to work on my femininity. It's the same. It's funny because that's like the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and then the whole thing is starting to shift. Well, toxic masculinity, and part of it is for guys, it's, they became synonymous. So it's like, right. Get us away from that word because it's been so associated with being toxic. I'm not toxic. And, it's like, no, I don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah, that term, it has made me want to be more distant from the word, because even though the word toxic is there to differentiate between this type of masculinity and something else, it still has felt very grouped together.
Society, and I think the media and whatever, has really leveraged it and put it all together. And I think they're starting to realize, and women are starting to realize, the impact that it's had on men and how that actually ends up hurting women. And now you know about Richard Reeves, right?
Oh, that name is not.
The name sounds familiar.
I feel like I should know the way that you're saying it.
Well, you maybe have heard of him. Richard Reeves is an English dude. He worked for the Brookings Institute. He wrote a book a couple of years ago called Of Boys and Men, and it's a long title after that. We had him on a program a couple of years ago right after the book. Great guy. Melinda Gates gave him a few $1 million, so he started his own foundation studying boys and men. And one of the takeaways from his book, which I love, is the conservatives and the liberals get it wrong. The conservatives want to fix this problem of man or masculinity by taking everyone back to the 50s, where guys were in charge, and you know where that goes. And the liberals think that anything you give or do for a boy or a man takes away from the girls and the women. I think that's starting to change. And they're starting to realize that, all right, we went a little too far there, and we're really hurting ourselves because, I want my son to succeed. I want my daughter to marry a good man. So maybe we should work with these boys and men.
And I am hearing a lot more. I don't know if it's just because my circles are changing, but I'm hearing a lot more conversation and emphasis on things for men's and boys' emotional health and things like that. Where I didn't. Where was that when I was a kid? Where was that when I was a kid? That wasn't anywhere.
How would you respond to men who feel like, and maybe you've already kind of answered this, but who feel like the efforts to quote unquote rewrite masculinity are an attack on them and their identity? Like the men that whenever they hear that word, it's very triggering for them when it's masculinity and the associations that all come with that.
One of the things I teach men to do is, I teach men to take the man deeper. So I want to sort of take the conversation deeper beyond, the platitudes and the this and the that's of it, and go, okay, really, what's driving that concern or that perspective? And I think part of what's happened in this culture is we've just consistently done divide and conquers. made things more extreme and got people fighting rather than go, okay, where do we have shared territory and shared concerns? And I think as you percolate down to its essence, we're a lot more alike and want shared goals, and we maybe have different perspectives, but I think the basic goals are the same. And so I'd like to leave the hyperbole and go into more of this emotional connection, because yeah, when we're there, I find that almost inevitably we connect. And as a little aside, I teach occasionally to co-ed groups, and I have a woman that brings me in as her main teacher. And I was hesitant teaching this stuff in a co-ed situation because, as I said, I found that men need a safe space. But what I quickly found was when we took it out of the political context, we took it out of the emotional context, we took it out of the relational context and put it into the physiology context, and we were just dealing with stress, trauma, PTSD, and our adaptation, and some of it's been enculturated because of our sex or whatever, or gender, and we start to not just understand it, but experience it on a somatic level. We connect, and these people that would have in a different situation be fighting each other are connecting because they're going at it in a different way.
Do you see that people tend to then realize we are a lot more alike than anything else, because we all have these experiences that shape us and these deeper emotional pains that are going on, and we look different, we have different life circumstances, but really if we can get to something real at the bottom, then we're just all very much alike.
Yeah, and getting real is getting vulnerable, and it's an edge because we got to go slow, and again, the somatic part helps that, but it's an unusual person, maybe an extreme clinical psychopath, that if you're being vulnerable with me, and I'm going to downregulate, I'm going to open up. I still might disagree with you, but I'm not going to attack you.
Yeah.
I want to give a little spotlight to the groups that you do. It's called MELD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody, we're going to link all your information in the show notes so that everybody has access to your book and they have access to information on these groups and stuff. But if somebody was interested in that, what could they expect to experience?
We try to make it like a full spectrum. So guys can do things that is sort of just with themselves, like journaling, meditations, and we're working on some other products which they're self-directed. And then we have a core, which is a 10-week program, which I first developed 10 years ago, and it's really evolved over the 10 years. A year ago, the APA, the American Psychological Association, published a big study. There was a couple-year study on this course, and with amazing results showing, in the course of time. Back then, the course was just 4 weeks. Now it's 10 weeks. But in 4 weeks, how these lives would be transformed from being in this training. And so it's a virtual training, and guys get a little training, but like anything we do, it's interactive. So they get to slowly interact more and more with guys, learn and practice through their experience. And then, we have private coaching and group coaching, which is more individualized, a little more intense, but intense and like they get more specific work, but not confrontational. And then we have our live retreats, which, I've been doing for several decades, which now we have one called Prime. It's 4 days. And we take guys sometimes off the street with no experience, no training, and we train them. Some are psychologists and psychiatrists. Some guys come in cold because their wife sent them. Mm-hmm. And after 4 days, they're all up to speed. They have skills in themselves. Because they've been practicing these skills with other men, they can do it with other men or do it with their partners, not as doing like a therapy with them, but show up in the way that we're talking about under, a little stress and still stay present. And so they have these skills that they take back into their lives, which is really what we want. And then we have advanced training for professionals or people that want to learn this and apply this as a profession.
This is really life-saving work, I feel like. With the male mental health epidemic, male suicide rates, all that stuff that's going on, like this is life-saving. I feel like you're giving men these tools to be able to experience really the world, not just like their relationships, but like the world in general, and process it and in healthy ways.
We've literally had men on video and on documentary film saying if it wasn't for this group or whatever, they would have killed themselves.
Wow. Yeah, I believe it. I mean,
yeah.
you can probably believe
I
that,
get
yeah.
it. Like remembering myself and my experiences before going into somatic therapy versus me now, I can handle the dysfunctions in my life and not disassociate from them. You know, I can feel a lot more things. I feel more connected with my relationships. I feel less scared of my emotions all the time. And I cannot imagine going back to before then. And so I can feel like I can somewhat empathize with guys who, you know, have this before and after experience. And it's just, it is absolutely life-changing.
Okay, I got one last question for you, unless you have a question beforehand.
No, I'm just kind of a little starstruck because this has been such a great conversation. I really like what we're talking about. You go ahead.
Yeah. So the majority of our listeners are going to be women. That's just the nature of our podcast. What, if you had to pick one thing that you want them to walk away with, or that you wish more women understood about men and their experience, what would you want to say?
Your partner and men in general really, really do want to succeed. And as men, we don't take something on like a relationship unless we think we can win in it. But we start to fail because of the tools and the models we were given. And so sort of take the next question, because I get it all the time, is, you know, how do I send my husband or whatever to you guys or to someone that, you know, to help them? And often what tilts the scales, it's just being honest and saying how you feel their pain. Not just how they're screwing up and how it affects you or the relationship, but, you know, all that aside, Jay, but, you know, I know you're trying and it irritates me and and, you know, but I love you and I want you to succeed. And yes, it's, you know, the way you're doing or not doing it might be hurting me, but beyond that, you know, I really care about you and I want you to get help that works. And we get guys from my coaching clients to my groups to my trainings, at least a third of them show up because their wife sent them.
I believe that.
And often it's like, either you do this or I'm gone.
Wow. Ultimatum. That's rough.
It is. But these guys go, you know, I'm thinking of a guy that was at the last training and I ended up talking to him. And after a couple of days, he said, yeah, my wife told me that. And after the first day, I started texting her about my experience, and for the first time in years, she said she loved me.
That's powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
If
awesome.
you're going to get a good ultimatum, an ultimatum period, this sounds like a very, very good one to get because it could be very transformative.
Yeah. And, you know, as guys, I'll admit it, we resist. And, you know, being in the healthcare field for all these years and, you know, having friends that are doctors and dentists, we all joke about a guy usually doesn't do something until he has to, even though he knows he's needed to do it for years. He's seen other people do that thing and get well with the same problem, but he won't do it until he's crippled.
Well, that's what I did.
Yeah. Yeah. You got into pretty bad
Bad shape.
Pretty bad shape for you.
Yeah. And then I was like, I have to do something. And you said, well, Katie was doing somatic and parts work therapy. And I was like, I want to try that. I don't know what else to do. I have to do something.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and this conversation felt like one of those rare ones that puts words to things that so many people feel but don't know how to express. So thank you for helping us see what's underneath Shutdown, what men are really up against, and how we can begin rewriting this story collectively.
Well, thank you. It's been my honor. And, you know, I love men, but I also love women. And, you know, my mission is really to help these men and help women and change this model that we've been suffering under collectively.
Yeah.
Truly suffering, yes. And you see it everywhere. So, yes, thank you so much. You can find Owen's book, Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine and Emotional Intelligence, and learn more about his work with men's groups and MELD in the show notes. And to every woman listening, I just want you to know you don't have to carry it all. You don't have to fix anyone. That's not what this episode's about. But you do get to ask for more. And this conversation is proof that more is possible.
I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.